Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am one of your hosts, James, and joining me, of course, is Joe.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And joining us also is the man who we could not do this episode without, if you've already read the title of this episode or the subject matter. We are celebrating 50 years of giant-sized X-Men, so we had to have our excellent X-Men expert back. So welcome back to the show for this first 2025 edition, Arco Esposito.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much. James, I am so happy that you hyped me up and I don't have to pay for it, but thank you very much.
Yes, so I'm very excited to do it because I said this I think before, but just to be like a pop culture confession. This is the first time reading this book for me. I've never read.
A few minutes ago.
Wow. Okay.
Nice.
So, when Joe indulges me with his Joe's Comics Corners, and I read books that are legendary and I've never read for the first time, Joe gives me the whole history. I know this is probably your, specific era of X-Men that
His
we're
background,
diving,
yeah.
the beginning of the specific era of X-Men that you love and enjoy, the Claremont era. So, actually, I know Len Wein wrote the book, but it's the lead into the Claremont era.
Right.
So I'm very fascinated to hear what you have to say. And this is coming off a heel. Last year, audience, if you didn't listen to it, we did 50 years of Wolverine. So I guess 1 year later, our favorite adamantium Canuck returns. This is the first time we're seeing him since that first appearance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. First time. Just a couple of tweaks in his visual outfit, but otherwise, yeah, same character.
So, I guess there's a lot of directions we could go with this. This book is this considered what the dawn of the modern age comic or the
Bronze Age?
Bronze Age.
Bronze Age.
Yeah, Bronze Age.
This book hit in April 75, so it's still Bronze Age.
Bronze Age lasted until 85, and then afterwards it's considered the modern age.
Yeah, which is the modern age has been going on for a long time.
I know.
The modern age basically begins with Dark Knight Returns, I think.
Okay.
Dark Knight. When we did, I forgot what book we did. When we were talking about our modern age artists,
and we were talking about Daredevil, Born Again. That's really modern age too. Yeah. So I think those are the two books from each company that launch you into the quote unquote modern age. But yeah, you could debate that, but you know.
Yes, I know. No copper age for you, Joe. Right? No copper.
No copper. No, I'm sorry. No. It's golden, silver, bronze, modern, and whatever the hell we are today. I don't know.
But Arco, I guess
I have a question for Arco.
Yep.
Sure.
You could not have read this book when it first came out. You would have been a little kid, right?
No, I didn't read it until I honestly didn't. I knew of the book when I got into X-Men, but I didn't read it probably until I would say the early 90s. Okay. And then they had a reprint. James, I think you saw that book of giant size X-Men reprint, and then like the first 5 or 6 issues after that were all collected. Yeah. So that's when I really first read it. I've read it probably a dozen times, and I love the story, but I do find little things new every time I read it. Probably haven't read it in about 5 or 10 years, if I had to guess. But yeah, it's been a while.
I read it twice in the last few months. So
yeah, but I've memorized it. Don't get me wrong.
I have no doubt about that. I mean, you know what's inside a Marvel comic book like I know a Yankee box.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think we could always rely on, if we had to do like a podcast in a moment, we could do a classic X-Men or a Thanos related book from just say, Arco, we need you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, this book, obviously, for audiences, I mean, we're going to assume that people who are listening have listened to it, but let's also assume, I guess, for me, who only has some semi-familiarity, this was the beginning of the X-Men again, right? Because it was on hiatus from the original run.
Hiatus from, I apologize, I can't remember the exact date. It went from 67 to issue 67 to issue 93. They did bi-monthly reprints of all the issues up to issue 66. And I honestly never understood why Marvel did that. I guess they obviously they were not as popular. The X-Men weren't as popular as they became later in the 70s and 80s, of course. But to keep them around just in reprints shows us now that there was at least the thought of the potential of what the book could have become. And I think even though they did have great artists like Neil Adams there at the end trying to save the book, I guess, although they had some great stories that he came up with. I believe, honestly, in my mind, that they wanted to keep it around to basically be in everybody's mind for a while in the comic book world. So when they had the right idea, the right group of people, writers and artists together, they would bring it back. And this was, I believe, the culmination of that idea.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Arco, I think it was also for copyright reasons, also keeping it around.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Well, mine's romantic. Yours is business. That's fine.
I like yours. I like yours better though.
That's fine. Yeah.
Well, as we've given him a lot of love on this podcast and other episodes, this is another Len Wein creation.
Mhm.
Yes,
A
Yeah.
great Len
favorite
Wein.
comic book writer of all time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know which either one of you want to chime in. Was this, like you said, Arco, was this Len came up with an idea and pitched it? Anyone know what gave you the impetus?
You know what, Joe? Why don't you start off, because fortunately we have somebody who was actually around at the time to at least enjoy it for what it was when it came out.
Well, I was just turned April. I just turned 20 in April of '75,
Right.
and that summer going to the con, I had asked Len where he came up with the idea. Now I just read today that it was Roy Thomas's idea for an international group of X-Men. Roy Thomas seems to be taking credit for everything that's happened in Marvel after Stan Lee gave the reins over to him. So, but that's for another episode. But Len told me that they discussed it in the office, and he wanted to do an international group, and he thought of the Black Hawk comic book, which DC had published for many years. Before that, I'll get this right now, Joe. Quality, I think, was it Quality Comics? Yes, it wasn't Force, it was Quality. And so he wanted to pick and choose characters from all over the world and bring them together to form this group. And, it blew me away. I mean, the first time reading it, I had no idea who the X-Men had been around, as Arco said, in reprints. The Beast was in about a 10 or 12 issue series, Amazing Adventures on his own, when he changed from Hank McCoy into the Furry Beast.
Right.
So they would pop up, they'd be mentioned, there'd be footnotes. They weren't exactly completely gone from the continuity, but they were. This was like, okay, this is our big summer tentpole kind of movie, and we're going to launch with this. This is the MCU before there was an MCU. And I think this is how they launched it. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the context, and and obviously, audience, aside from it's the first Bronze Age book, we are also celebrating it because it gives us most of the legacy X-Men characters that we love.
Yes.
It introduces what's the roster of characters it introduces? It's I'll give it to you, Arco.
Yeah. So as far as the characters that we know, that the core group, Cyclops, Angel, Iceman, and Marvel Girl, we have returning to to this book. We have Banshee, who we had seen a few times. And then Sunfire also. So on top of that, we meet once again Wolverine, who we saw a year earlier in the Hulk 181, 182 issues. And then for the very first time, we have Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and for a brief cup of coffee, John Proudstar, also known as Thunderbird. So you could not come up with a more diverse yet exciting group. Looking back on it, I can only imagine what it was like reading for the very first time, seeing these bright, colorful characters, colorful in every way, not only just on the art, but just in their personalities. Reading them and actually just like feeling their character come out of the pages, and knowing them as I did when I first read this book in the early 90s, I believe, Giant Size X-Men #1. Knowing them as I knew them and reading them for the very first time, I was able to, in my mind, understand where in the 70s. Let me put it like this: you had the groups like the Avengers and the Defenders, but you never had a diverse group like this that was able to stand out in such a way that was able to last for as long as it did when I started reading it, getting into the 80s and 90s. And it really is just basically a trophy for Claremont and Len Wein and for whatever Stan Lee put into it, and Roy Thomas, obviously. So hats off to them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I reading this for the first time. Obviously, I've coming to it much later after spending a lot of time with these characters
Years
in many mediums at this point.
Right.
But their personalities are kind of there. They like whoever's
Yeah.
like going forward. Like
Mhm.
I know they've changed and obviously have tons of history, but everybody who you like, the embodiment of those characters is there, and everyone who's written them afterwards seems to have just like it stayed. It stayed.
It's a template.
They were incredibly well fleshed out early on, as far as characters go. It's funny that you say that, because looking at one particular character, Colossus was just a 18-year-old farm boy from Russia and he had that innocent mentality on the pages when Xavier first met him, and that's when we saw his little sister, who he saved in the middle of the field by turning into Colossus and ruining the tractor that I'm sure the Russian government was gonna charge his family for the next 100 years for. But Peter Rasputin held that innocence and showed it for many years, up until probably the late 90s, where he seemed to mature a little bit more. So these characters were well thought out early on, and like James, like you said, not much really had changed for probably the next 2 decades as far as their character and their personas on the pages that we were able to read. Which is also another testament to all the writers that came afterwards. They really just said, these guys are perfect as is. Of course, their costumes may change and their lives may change, but they really kept their core intact for decades.
Yeah. What I like about Peter is, to build on what you just said, Arco, his innocence is he just doesn't go right off with the professor after he explains. He goes back home to the farm, and he has to counsel from his parents, get there to seek their permission. And it's real, and it's just a few pounds. It's really done well. You can feel the love the family has. It's just, I thought that, to me, that's the highlight of the book. Peter leaving the farm. I mean, there's a lot of action, of course, but as far as drama goes, or story beats, that was the highlight of the book for me. I got, especially this time reading it again. I just loved how Len handled that. It was beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, and Joe, to go to your point, like we always say these days, like it's like what in the first 12 pages they assemble the whole team, and in today's comics that would be like 6 issues.
We're hitting the ground running.
Yeah. And every mutant that they found, while not an origin story, gave you just enough to let you know where these guys are in their life, in their lives. Wolverine is in Canada working for Department H. Storm in the middle of the Serengeti, and, she's a goddess, and these are all basically adults, whereas the X-Men that we knew prior to that were children that were basically in high school, college years, and then just basically reaching young adulthood by the time the book ended at issue 67. And here we are picking up where that left off with a brand new group of people that are just, they're men, they're mature, they're women, they don't need the guidance that the kids needed earlier on in the early issues.
Yeah, which I think is an interesting point that I think kind of got sidelined a lot, like at least in the high level stuff. Like I think Marvel always depicts the X-Men as it's Professor Xavier, and he's always taking in these younger mutants to teach them, which is true. But they don't really like you said, these are all grown people,
right?
And they don't really focus on them taking in like more adult mutants in the later runs, or
nor do they bringing this up, James, first and foremost, Xavier's is a school. So because now you have the quote unquote the adults, the X-Men. It's you're really hard pressed to even think about this the whole building being a school until Kitty Pryde shows up. And she is the very first student that they bring in who is not an adult. She was 13 years old. And really the first student you see at Xavier's since, if I'm not mistaken, since the X-Men graduated in issue like 15 or whatever it was. So, that after she came on, then they started to focus a little bit more on the school, but you couldn't do that with the X-Men, so they had to branch it off, and that's when the New Mutants were born in the early 80s. So and they were focused, they were the young X-Men, up and coming X-Men, future X-Men, but they were more school focused, and still dying obviously, but yeah, they still had their Regents tests were still very important. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
no,
the reason for this book starting with this story is that Xavier. We learn later on that he's being controlled as his Cyclops, but he's putting a strike force together to go back to Krakoa to get the former team. So you have to hit the ground running quickly here because there's an urgency, and that's the great thing about comic books, because comic books can start with the sense of urgency if the writer is good at his or her job and the artist, and Len was one of the best. Let's just hit the ground running and get this thing moving. And as Stan would say back in the day, we'll explain as we go along. Just keep up, Pilgrim. And yeah, that's what you do.
And it's funny because as I was reading up on this before you guys, before we met up, I did not know that there was a term in literature about starting a story basically in the middle of it, and it is called in medias res.
Yeah.
Which means that you're starting a story right in the middle, and like in the ground running. You don't need that much of a backstory. They gave it to you in a few panels where the X-Men go to check out this major mutant that Xavier sent with Cerebro, turns out to be the whole island, and now they're all trapped, and Act 2 they're looking for these other mutants to help them escape.
Yeah, I learned something. That's good, Arco. I didn't know that.
There you go.
You.
In medias res.
Medias res. Yeah, it's Latin.
This is an educational podcast too, audience.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming because of all what's happened the last 3 years in modern day Marvel, this is the first appearance of Krakoa.
Yes, and Joe, I'm not exactly sure if you were referring to Xavier's mind control later in the retcon years of it. Is that what you were talking about, or?
Well, we learn later on in the book that the island has been controlling them all. The island let Cyclops escape.
Yes,
so
yes. Okay, right. Okay,
more back to feed on.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Yes, that's exactly what it was. I didn't know if it was something that was retcon later in life. Now, as you know, I'm not a big retcon guy, so to me, that island was shot into space, and it never, I honestly, later in life, I have no idea how it made it back to Earth. Okay, I'm sure there's a story someplace that I missed, and I'm not sure it's that important. However, I did read the new X-Men series later with the Krakoa. I'm sorry, what is that? The Krakoan.
The Krakoa. Well, it's House of X and Powers of X.
Yes, and so that's all very interesting to me and something we can talk about in the future. But to me, that stuff doesn't really happen. Krakoa dies at the end of this issue, and that's it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, this is so I guess we can kind of move into the whole thing of it, like you guys just touched upon, is that they're all Cyclops is let go to go and bring back more things for Krakoa, and they don't realize. And I guess Krakoa is kind of created like Godzilla. It seems like in the panels of the comic.
Yes, and what a great way to bring in the fears of nuclear energy into it. Also, and nuclear experimentation in the Pacific, a la Bikini Atoll, all of a sudden mutates the very biosphere of this island, where it became sentient, and it becomes Krakoa, and every little thing on the island is basically just a hive mentality, whether it be the vines or maybe even the rocks, the birds, everything is working at once, and Krakoa needs energy mutant energy apparently. So I don't know where it's been getting all these mutants in the past, but Xavier senses a very powerful mutant, as he's wont to do with Cerebro, and sends out the X-Men in the Blackbird, best ever jet as far as I'm concerned, and they don't find this mutant, but all of a sudden they are attacked on this island, and they are strung up by these vines that are leeching their energies off of them, and that's how we really see the beginning of this of the comic, is that Scott Cyclops is busting through, and he says, his power is gone. He doesn't have his visor on. His eyes are red or black and red, basically, but he doesn't have the power. And Krakoa basically had just siphoned off enough out of him that he was needed to recharge. And sure enough, they came back, and he needed to put his visor back on. And amazingly, from the time that he gets back to Westchester County. By the way, how did he get back? I guess Krakoa put him on the jet and pressed the button somehow to get him back there. Okay, we won't. That's a plot hole, but that's fine. It doesn't. Xavier may have done it in a few panels, but it took a while for them to put everybody together. And these guys are just being leached out there in for, let's just say, a week, maybe.
We don't know the time frame. It's true.
Yeah, exactly. So Xavier and Summers put together this team, and the way that Xavier does it, he does it in a humane way with everybody. He appeals to their humanity, and each of them in their own way is being treated. Probably Storm is the only one who's being treated very nicely, and the innocence of Peter doesn't know any better, doesn't know anything different than what his life is, but Wolverine knows that he doesn't want to do what he's doing in Department H. He's probably an assassin for them, at that point, as we learn later in life. Nightcrawler is about to be put to the stake in Germany, in a church of all places, because he looks like a demon. Sunfire has his own issues when they find him. And Thunderbird is chasing down a buffalo in the in the West, and has to prove to himself and to Xavier, the white guy, as he says, that I'm as strong as anybody else, and I'm going to prove it to you. And because he needs to prove that there are still worthy Native American Indians still living in America, in the world, really. And Xavier appeals to all of their vanity, their humanity, however you want to put it, and puts together this very diverse and amazing and colorful team to save the day, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, that was very well put, Arco. That's right. Excellent summary.
yeah. So I mean, going into it, they then, and right away you see that these colorful personalities, while are bursting out of the pages, are also bursting against each other, because they are those kinds of strong personalities. So right away you have Scott Summers, Cyclops, going up against Wolverine, just right off the pages, and right off the bat. And then you have Sunfire, who is only helping out for whatever reason, has his own reasons, I think he says. And as we find out afterwards, after this mission, he ends up taking off. So they have strong personalities. Another very big contradiction from the kids that the X-Men were. And right off the bat, they are going against each other, and Cyclops needs to put them together as a team so they can go save, the original X-Men. And when they get there, they realize that the entire island, rather quickly, they fight a giant. I think there's a giant bug that attacks them. I'm not sure about the plants, but I'm sure the plants were alive also. And it doesn't take long for them to find the X-Men in the cave, strung up with these the tentacles on them, getting leached out of their energies, and it cuts them down. And what does Angel Warren Worthington III say? "You fool! Why did you come back? It's a trap. Don't you know it's a trap? Haven't we done this enough? So yeah, and that's when finally we find out Act 3 that Krakoa is the living island, and he mutates, transforms into a bipedal humanoid man thing looking, now that I think about it, because he's got the big red eyes, man thing, swamp thing looking thing, and must have been, it's an island, but how tall was he? Was he 50 feet tall, 100 feet tall? The whole island transforms. All right, whatever. And they're fighting. It's a fairly standard fight. But the X-Men, are their last ditch effort. And they put together an idea. I forgot that there was Lorna Dane was there, Polaris, the quote unquote daughter of Magneto and girlfriend of Havoc, Cyclops' brother. It was part of the team at the time, and she uses her magnetic powers to reverse the polarity and send the whole island of Krakoa screaming, as it's written on the page, screaming into outer space. And that's where he was up until whenever. And that was pretty much the end of the story. I understand that we went through it pretty fast, but I loved the very last panel. They're all on the Blackbird, which, by the way, only holds 2 people very uncomfortably, but somehow they were able to fit 13 in there in this particular one, so that's all right. And the last one, I think Angel goes, he says, "What are we going to do with 13 X-Men now?" And to be continued. And we find out rather quickly that what exactly is going to happen to 13 X-Men. What's great about this book is that it could have been a one-off, could have been a one-shot deal. They obviously, they went on, but if they wanted to stop right then and there, they totally could have, and it still would have been a great book. The history would be very kind to it, but they knew that they were starting it up again. And issue 94 came out, I think, a month later, maybe 2 months later, because it was bi-monthly at the time. And that's where they decided that the original X-Men were going to take off, and they were adults. They went their own way, except for Cyclops. And that particular issue is when the title now read "All New, All Different X-Men," and that's what we got. We got this brand new team, and the first story was Count Nefaria, right after Giant Size X-Men. For those who don't know, is I don't know what you would call Count Nefaria. He was actually more of an Iron Man enemy at the time, and had been up against S.H.I.E.L.D. also. Part of the Magia, the crime network of whatever that was in the Marvel universe.
Oh, that's the Mafia.
For lack of a better word. So that was what the all new, all different X-Men's first mission was after the Krakoa issue. It was up against Count Nefaria.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
As all the history. I know.
I'm sorry.
No. That's good.
You put a few ideas into my head. First of all, the island becoming sentient because of the radioactivity and all the ecosystems coming together to form Krakoa. I'm wondering if Lynn was thinking back a few years to the biorestorative formula that Alec Holland then becomes when he dies as the swamp, becomes Swamp Thing. And then later on, when I wonder if Alan Moore's looking back at this issue and saying, wait a minute, let's reverse that.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is obviously we've I believe Swamp Thing came out in the early 70s. Is that correct? And I know that Man Thing was in the 70s, mid 70s also, which obviously it's a a definite riff off of Swamp Thing. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if all three stories melded into one thing that they all borrowed off each other.
Well, so I have a few questions about which I appreciate the whole history arc of because I
Okay,
like,
no, no
but
problem.
so now I'm going to dive in some, since
Sure.
I didn't read the stuff, and obviously X-Men before this was, as we just talked about, was not in print or
Mhm.
new issues.
Mhm.
So was the last team had Havoc and Polaris on it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it
And
did.
Beast left in the comics, or he left off?
Good question. I believe actually Beast was still around, and he did not leave them per se for another group. He started to work for the Roxxon energy company, oil company. It was like the big company at the time that did a lot of testing and experimentation. So he worked for them and had to. And I actually have this book, Bizarre Adventures number 11, reprint of how he became the furry beast by experimenting on himself. Basically, had to ingest a serum that he was working on to basically save his life because people were coming to kill him, and he didn't realize that it was going to turn him blue and furry. Actually, it was more gray at the time, but
Yes, it was great at first.
yeah, it was more gray at the time. So he was part of that last few issues before they went on the hiatus, and then was on his own before he actually joined the Avengers. Also, so he joined the Avengers in the early 70s.
What they did with the Beast is they kind of made him. They just took Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes, yeah, and it was a perfect and it was a perfect person to do that with because he was already halfway there.
Yeah,
in a humanoid form. I mean, it was, for lack of a better way of putting it. He had big feet, he was very athletic. So they just brought him, pushed him over the edge, and made him Jekyll all the way and Hyde.
Well, yeah, I didn't realize they introduced in the original run Havoc and Polaris. I thought they came later on in the Claremont run or something. But
no.
I have a question, Arco.
Sure.
Because I think there was a line. I have the facsimile here. They released last year.
Yep.
There's a line at the end. Bobby's a little annoyed with Alex because weren't Bobby and Lorna involved at one point?
Yes, they were.
I thought I remembered that correctly. Thank you.
So Iceman was with Lorna Dane first. I don't know for how long they were together for. And by the way, her hair was green from the beginning. Which is definitely strange for a 1960s. Yeah, for a 1960s book, for a woman to have green hair, I think was a very bold choice. But yes, and then her and Havoc basically got together, and they were an item by the end there.
And they were together for, I guess, a long.
They were together for a very, very long time. On and off. And after the 80s, after the Marvel Mutant Massacre and then Fall of the Mutants, that was when the cracks started showing up. No fault of their own. It's when Polaris was taken over by the mutant entity called Malice, which was one of the Marauders that Mr. Sinister set on the Morlocks. So, yes.
Because I only remember them vaguely when they relaunched X Factor with Havoc, Strong Guy,
Polaris. Oh, yeah, Strong Guy. Yeah, issue number 81 of X Factor.
Yeah, that's the Polaris and X Factor. And frankly, the Havoc costume that I personally like the best.
Oh, no, I never liked that one. I know what you're talking about with the open face mask and everything. Yeah, no, I wasn't a big fan of that one myself. But I get it. I mean, you're growing up with that one. Me myself, I need to see concentric rings coming out of his chest.
That was designed by Neil Adams.
Yeah.
And then and so I guess you said I didn't read on, like you gave us a little summary that what we're going to do with 13 X-Men, we're not going to deal with 13 X-Men.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, what are we going to do with them? That was the idea. That in Xavier's mind, hey, the more the merrier. But yeah, that wasn't going to be how it was going to go.
So that's Gene didn't say this. Oh, sorry, Art Joe.
No, that's a great hook. I was 20, so I'm not a little kid, but I was excited by that. What are you going to do with 13 X-Men? But could you imagine a 10-year-old reading that, being blown away by this incredible story, and then oh my God, when is the next issue coming out?
Mm-hmm.
13 X-Men. This is like
Yeah.
bigger than the Avengers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great
Mm-hmm.
ending and a great hook just to grab your readers and hopefully build from there, which they did obviously.
Yeah.
But so Jean stays with Scott though, right? Or does she leave too for a little while?
She leaves. She leaves also. Although her and Scott are still dating, but she's not with the group. And in the next few issues, you see her out and about, and out enjoying herself. But obviously, by issue 98, 99, her and Scott are out for dinner, and that's the beginning of the Dark Phoenix. Well, not Dark Phoenix. The Phoenix saga. How she gets those powers and everything. So she's still around, but not part of the team.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, it was not that far away from when she must.
No, not at all.
Up that storyline for
not at all. And by that time, you know what? And I'm sorry that I don't know this exact timeline, but let's not forget that the Iceman and Angel were part of the.
Champions.
I'm sorry.
Champions?
The Champions, yes. They were part of the Champions, which I believe predated this story. If I'm not mistaken, they predated this story. I believe that it was in the early 70s that they were part of the Champions, which means that they must have come back at some point. I'm not exactly sure how that worked. And then after this, they went on to become part of the Defenders.
That's right.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, they made the rounds.
Yeah, they made the rounds. Yeah, exactly.
They never made it to the Fantastic Four, though.
No, no.
Only a select few made it to the Fantastic
Four. Yeah, exactly.
Owlman, She-Hulk,
Mm-hmm.
Medusa, obviously.
Yeah.
When Sue was pregnant with Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. Also, looking like we started the podcast saying why this book is so celebrated because it relaunches the X-Men, but it also gives us the most iconic X-Men of all time. You'd argue, and it's amazing that. I mean, what do you think it is that, like, because you said, Arco, like a lot of these books try to do books with diverse characters or different teams or do offshoots, and but yeah, like Storm stayed, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Storm, Wolverine. They were the top selling. Yeah. Like they all have mini series or series on their own.
That's the group that made, as far as I'm concerned, may have even saved Marvel, because James, I don't know why it worked. Because let's look at the Avengers at the same time, and let's talk about the diversity of that team. Was it diverse? There was only one person who was not a white American on that team, and that was Scarlet Witch, who was a white European woman. It was still Tony Stark. It wasn't Rhodey in the armor. So I don't know. I would not say that it was as diverse a team as it could have been. All right. No fault of their own, no fault of their writers. That's just how it was written. That's fine. Yeah. So for the writers of the X-Men to come forth with, I mean, a daring idea to be as diverse, I think that it really caught the attention and the imagination and probably hit it at the right time where these characters, as they were written, just hit the right notes for everybody and really took off that way.
Yeah, no, it has to be. I mean, I guess is this? I mean, did it ramp up right away after this, or did it like take time?
No, I'd say that again, I wouldn't know numbers. Joe, you were in the business, so 10, 20, 30,000 back then maybe were good numbers. I wouldn't know what they were.
Oh, you mean copies per month?
Yeah, copies per month.
You had to sell 200,000 copies a month, and you got canceled.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's say that they were, but they at the time they were still doing bi-monthly, or so every 2 months, however you say that. And it wasn't until issue like 103 or 104 when they finally wrote on the cover, now monthly. So that's when they started doing it like that. I would say if within 10 issues from 94 to 104, 105, whenever they did that within a calendar, probably about 2 years, I would say that they realized that yes, it is it is bigger and better. They're selling more because of it. So I would say that it wasn't that slow of a ramp up, and actually happened rather fast for them, that they started selling them every month. Yeah, I'd say it happened pretty fast. Yeah.
It did. And Arco, I want to build on something you just said about why it took off. This just occurred to me. I don't know. This I could be spitballing here. You guys tell me if I'm off base. But book dropped in April of '75.
Mm-hmm.
Just about a year after the end of the final end of the Vietnam War,
Mm-hmm.
the most contentious war in American history. People divided a nation. So I think it was right. This book came along at the right time because there were young people who were so angry about that freaking war, and I think this might have hit a nerve with them because they had diverse characters, and we saw what was going on in Southeast Asia. But except for a handful, the war profiteers, nobody liked what was going on. So I think this book, I think it ties into that a little bit.
I could see that, Joe. Absolutely, and in fact, they have a character who was a Vietnam veteran in Thunderbird.
Right.
So was a very proud Vietnam veteran, and not that he wanted to be there, but was proud to serve his country. And that was celebrated later in his life. Post death, when we see his younger brother celebrating his older brother's life, and actually burning his body as his ancestors were doing. So we see that later in life. But I would say that would be a very good reason as to why perhaps maybe it did take off the way it did.
Reasons, I think one of
absolutely.
Reasons,
Yeah. Joe, I know you and Arco have debated this sometimes, but when did the Teen Titans kick off?
Yeah,
the new Teen Titans. 1980.
1980, Marv Wolfman and whatever. Yes.
So I think it was
George Press. I apologize, but the Teen Titans were around before 1980.
Well, I mean, the new Teen Titans that spawned this, because I think Joe, you always I think you said that I think the inspiration for what X-Men were doing at this time, which is the lead up to that, led to some of the success to the new team.
Oh yeah, you could see the DC editorial. Hey, this X-Men book's been going great guns the last 5 years. We need something like this. Let's put our two top people on it. And the two top people at the time at DC were Marv Wolfman and George Perez. Before 1980, at this point he was not even cutting his teeth anymore. He was just wowing everybody over at Marvel with his Avengers and Fantastic Four. And you look at some of that stuff he did on Avengers and Fantastic Four, it's incredible. So, I mean, I don't know how they got him away from Marvel, but they did. And that book went on to be, for the next 10 years or so, the two jockeying back and forth, X-Men and Titans. Those were the two books. If you were a comic book fan, you had to read those two books.
And look at it. I mean, you have two books that are very, not only maturely written, but still very appealing to a younger audience, where you have I always talk about the colors of the book, and it cannot be understated enough that if you put a color, the right palette of colors with the right characters, it will just make the book that much better, as far as I'm concerned. But you also have colorful characters in the Teen Titans, since that's who we're talking about, who we know as their former sidekicks. Robin, you have Kid Flash, whoever one that was at the time, and Robin still had his classic Robin uniform with his little leotard tights and his little booty shoes and everything. So I mean, most colorful costume I've ever seen. Everybody loves the Robin costume. I don't care if it's the newer versions or the colors always the same for a reason. So I think that has a lot to do with it, and how it drew the younger audiences, and why both of those books were so popular for 10-15 years against each other.
Popular, it's like history repeating itself. Back in 1960 with the success of Justice League of America, Martin Goodman, then publisher of Marvel, went to Stan, hey, I want one of those books like DC has. And he came up with the Fantastic Four. And here we go. And then 20 years later, in 1980, I could just see, I don't know who the DIC was at DC at the time. It might have been Dick Giordano, but I'm not sure. But maybe, hey, we got a copy of that X-Men book. Give me something. and boom. Well, we got these sidekick characters, like Arco said. Let's throw them together in a book and put two top people on and see what happens. So yeah,
And how many great characters came out of those books? Those stories. I mean,
Wildfire and Raven, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Deathstroke.
Deathstroke.
Deathstroke
I forgot
came
that.
out
Thank you, Arco.
in a Teen Titans story, number 2, issue number 2, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, yeah, right off the bat. So a lot of great stories there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just saying, like, they're not New Teen Titans was diverse in a different way than Giant Size X-Men was, but because you had aliens and people from the netherworlds and but I think both teams, like you said, they're colorful, they're diverse, and that's probably why they I guess fed off of each other, but also like they were the top 2 selling books of the time.
Yeah.
And they appeal to maybe a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old, because you had adult storylines going on in these books, but at the same time they didn't I don't think I could think I could see a 10-year-old loving these books for the very reasons Arco's outlined.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good also, like they, like you said, 10-year-olds were embracing it, but the writing was very adult or mature, probably mature.
Mature. Mature is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, adult. I mean, like I meant like adult, like it's like a more like higher level reading. But I think they kept like anyone could read it, but they weren't like I guess it was saying they're not trying to write down to their audience. They're writing.
No, definitely not. No.
When you have a guy named Deathstroke, which of course that was his name. That wasn't his name in the cartoons because they couldn't say Deathstroke on WB. They had to call him Terminator, or whatever. What was his name? Wasn't it Terminator?
It was Terminator. Deathstroke the Terminator.
Yeah. So they couldn't call him Deathstroke straight up. So I mean, they had to be a little bit more mature, and it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, they I guess they, as we've talked about in the Dark Phoenix saga, the actual Dark Phoenix thing, like Wolverine did a lot of things off camera.
Did some bad things in the sewers. He doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, we had that discussion.
I mean, well, in this book, he's almost cutting up the guy's tie and like threatening him with a single claw and walking out of the office. So I guess that's also setting up the whole thing with Alpha Flight and all those things that come in the future with Wolverine.
Yeah. And what a great story that was. So and it didn't take too long. Let's see, Alpha Flight's first appearance of Guardian was in issue 109. So basically only 15 issues, which since they were within 2 to 3 years, you had the Alpha Flight for the first time.
Wow, it's amazing when you look back at what this book spawned. It spawned an entire side universe of the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
The way Fantastic Four did that with Stan and Jack, the first 60 issues or so, Len setting it up, and then of course Chris Claremont, Cockrum, and then later on John Byrne. Not later on, very quickly on coming on the book. 108 was it, Arco? Did he come on the book, John Byrne, issue 108?
Oh, yeah, good question. No, it was a Magneto story. I remember the cover was Magneto was had his hands up and against the X-Men, and Wolverine was holding his own claws against himself because Magneto was using his power to use against him. So yeah, it must have been like 107 to 108. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, an entire universe is built up.
And when we talk about that universe, what a huge universe it is, because
it's galaxies.
it spans galaxies, and storylines and galaxies and generations of mutants that thankfully some of them did grow up because you can't be 95, you can't be 15 forever. And it went all the way out in the different galaxy with Shi'ar and Empire and everything. But I would say it's actually a bigger universe than the Fantastic Four was, because it was so popular. It took over the popularity of the Avengers, or it took over the popularity of the Fantastic Four, which means that all the writers and many writers wanted to get in on it, and they all brought their own little flair to it, and they each created a little bit more and added more and more layers to this, this fantastic onion that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And as far as I'm concerned, never collapsed upon itself, as many things can do when they get to be too big. Uh, how can you say that it that it did collapse on itself when you have, in 2002, you have Wolverine, the most popular character that you had seen since, since the Fantastic Four started, and only then, 25 30 whatever years after his first appearance, you get his origin story. And it was a fantastic origin story that we still, 22 years later, that's his origin. It's still kept. They kept it, which they normally change things on a whim every couple of years. Exactly. So it just gets bigger and bigger, but better and better in a lot of different ways. Even though I got out a long time ago, and I always say that my X-Men was up until the Age of Apocalypse. I've read a lot of stories that have come out afterwards, and I can see the appeal that people would have. And somebody has to get in at their ground floor. Happened in 2010, 2015, which is great, but they're still there and they're still amazing, and that's all from this book.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah. And it's also a universe that got so big it incorporated the other stuff. Like it's the Tal Shiar have met the Avengers, the Fantastic Four.
Absolutely.
The Starjammers have met those guys.
Absolutely.
The Guardians of the Galaxy were spawned probably through all this. Like it was. It just kept building and building and building into this, with the Marvel Cosmic, I guess that's.
I mean, the only thing I'm surprised that they haven't made Galactus a mutant, at this point. So, every writer, every artist, I think, has wanted to do X-Men. Although I have to say, I'm surprised that McFarlane never really wanted to. Although he's drawn them very well. Obviously we've seen Wolverine drawn. I don't think I've ever seen him draw any other X-Men. I really don't think I've ever seen it. So he's probably the only big name from my youth that didn't go out of his way to get onto an X book.
And he could have.
I'm sure he could have.
I mean, I think if he wanted to do it, he seemed that Spider-Man run they gave him, that 12 issues before he left, started Image. Like he wrote that and drew that, and it was basically every character he wanted to
absolutely.
Draw. He drew Wolverine for that Wendigo story, and
absolutely.
Which is a great looking Wolverine.
He put in the Ghost Rider. We had the Lizard on that.
Great cover with the Lizard. That's a great cover.
Calypso was in there, so it was. Although I never really thought about it, but it is a little strange that McFarlane never really got onto an X book. And he could have. All right, something to ask him next time.
Yes.
When we have him on.
Speaking of artists, Arco, I think you mentioned once before you weren't the biggest fan.
Not a big fan of
How would you rate his art on this book?
Flat. I mean, it's the same as always. It fit for what they were doing, especially starting them off. That's fine, but when the personalities and the character of these characters started coming out, you needed something more energetic and mature, and that's what Byrne brought to these characters, and continued straight through the Dark Phoenix saga. And I can't imagine, what those stories would have been like with any other artist.
Yeah, I mean, he left DC. He was he re-energized the Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah.
But he wanted not he didn't want all his artwork back. He wanted one single page back, and DC's policy was no, you don't get anything back. And he said, and he left. That's it. Yeah, and he landed here. So the guy made the right decision. Yeah. I like his work a little more than you do. I think, but you can't. Yeah, but when Byrne comes on, like I said, it's exciting. it's also more nuanced in the facial expressions,
Absolutely.
the body language.
Yeah, you really feel what they're putting out as far as emoting,
Yes,
what they're
well,
putting.
that's
You
what you're
you
for.
feel
Thank
that a
you.
little bit more. And Cockrum, which is funny, we never talked about this, but if I had to pick the issues of his that I did like, or I thought fit a little bit better, they were the Shiar Starjammer ones, because he came back after Byrne left
That's
in
right.
the
I
late
forgot that.
in the late 140s, and he took over for however many years until I believe Silvestri took over Silvestri. No, John Romita Jr. and excuse me, in the early 170s. So he was around for all those, and I think that art lent itself a little bit better to the galaxy faring stories of the Starjammers and the Shiar and the Brood. That was him that he did that artwork. So while I give him, I don't give him the kudos he deserves, obviously as an artist. In my opinion, if I had to choose, I would probably pick his later issues when he came back than the ones that he started off with.
That's fair. And he was probably a more practiced uh,
Yeah.
artist at that point. Also, he would have had some really good inkers on him at that point. Also,
Yeah.
he inked himself on this book, and I think
Yeah.
if he had Terry Austin or Joseph Rubenstein, who
Mhm.
later went on to ink, Byrne, obviously, he would have it would have looked better. So
Maybe. I imagine, which is very sad that nobody could ever save Al Milgram, but that's fine. It's neither here nor there. So, but yeah.
there are
So
some that can't be said. That's true. So,
yeah.
although I don't, I've actually, well, that's for another time when
Yeah.
I'll tell you about some Al Milgrom stuff I actually do like.
All right.
There are a few books. There's a run of West Coast Avengers that I actually like. When
Oh,
Joe, when Joe Sinnott inked them, the guy that inked Kirby for all those years.
right.
Sometimes a great inker can turn even a subpar artist into like wow, I didn't think he had it in him. Well, he doesn't. It was the inker.
Yeah, it was the inker. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's been great, Arco.
Thank you.
This is a great tribute to giant size X-Men. 50 years of it, so
Yeah,
it's kind of
50
hard to
years,
imagine
wow.
we have all these characters now for 50 years, and
Yeah.
they're still going strong. And
Still going strong.
I think Storm right now has her own mini-series. Obviously, Wolverine continues to have endless mini-series and team-ups.
Well,
Colossus is a
almost
major
every book
player.
at Marvel is a miniseries because
Yeah. Yeah.
things aren't going too well over it. But
Yeah, and for me to not have read it, I mean, I was only 2 years old when this book came out, so obviously I wasn't going to read it till later in life. But to not even read it until the early '90s, after I had been in with them for so long, through so many big storylines, it just goes to show you that. From humble beginnings, and it wasn't very humble. It was dynamic and explosive. Uh, I'm very happy to have read this story and say this is where it all began, and to have been a part of it, even 20 years later, still feels like you were part of something big.
that's great.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Well,
certain books can do that.
Yeah.
They can grab you and they never let you go. And this is one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of them.
Well, Argo, I'm going to wrap up in like 5 minutes, but I want to just give the audience one quick thing from you. Behind the scenes, you were supposed to join us for the Deadpool Wolverine episode.
Ah, okay. Yes.
So
yes.
I'd like you for just for 5 minutes. What are your thoughts on Deadpool Wolverine?
We spoke about this. I didn't have a chance to see it in the movie theater. I wish I would have seen it in the movie theater, and I wish that YouTube wouldn't have ruined every single part of the movie for me, but that's on me. I will tell you that even though I had already seen pretty much every scene in that movie, I still found it hilarious. I found it exciting, and even some of the stuff that I didn't see, I'm like, oh my God, this makes even more sense. A lot of the context. They did a fantastic job, and for Deadpool and Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool to be even more irreverent than he was in the first two, you know what? it would have been annoying if it was just him, but you had the straight man in this case was Logan, was Wolverine, was Hugh Jackman, and the two of them had, you know, that chemistry and charisma together that made it was more than a team up. It was more than a buddy movie. It was an event, and it, some might say it shouldn't have worked, but you know what? Logan in 2017 was a great send off for the character. We remembered him like that instead of maybe some of the weaker movies in the late 2010s. And we saw that Deadpool was the next iteration of the X books on film. The two of them together was magical. It really was magical to me, and I felt that all the little surprises along the way, you know, Captain America coming back, quote unquote, and it being Johnny Storm, Electra, you know, oh, and you're Wonder, oh, Electra, yes, you know, so you know, every little nod, every little fanboy experience that you wanted to see, every little Easter egg that they gave us. We wanted to see all those. At some point, we wanted to see a Gambit. We wanted to see Blade come back. We wanted to see a Cassandra Nova, and they threw it all together. And hell, they had the monster, the cloud monster from Loki, you know, and it, you know. This was the TVA. You know, it should not have worked in some aspects, and it worked beautifully.
Well said, Arco.
Well
And
said.
what was your thought? I know that sometimes people are a little divided on. What are your thoughts on Channing Tatum's Gambit?
Oh, I thought it was great. I listen. That wouldn't have been the take that we would have seen in the film. You know, okay, it would have been a little bit more serious. Okay, and he was. Let's be honest. A Cajun accent, a real Cajun accent, is pretty much like that. It's unintelligible. You can't understand the word he's saying. So you know, for him to say, "I haven't seen Sling Blade in a while. Hit me again," is hilarious to me. Okay, but you know, the fact that Channing Tatum was pressing to be that character for so long, just like Ryan Reynolds was for Deadpool, and he just couldn't pull it off like Ryan Reynolds did. It was great that they had him in there, and you know, if you saw some of those deleted scenes, good chance that they may bring him back. You know, and because they see that he had a lot of fans. You know, almost like the stealing the character that may have stolen the show a little bit. So yeah, I thought it was great.
I thought it was like he had the most comic accurate costume I've ever seen in any MCU movie.
Yes, it was, and most of the time we say, you know, you can't have it because it just doesn't work. That's why we never saw the spandex in the early 2000s, because they just couldn't figure out a way to make it work. And here we are, we have the yellow costume for the very first time, and you know, it's a little bit more of a it's got some armor to it built in, you know, to make it look like that. But it was perfect. It was perfect for how it was shown on the screen. They didn't care about with Gambit. It was 100% the issue 166 first appearance of how he looked with the hair and everything. The one thing I'll say is that probably Shannon was just a little bit beefier than the first appearance of Gambit, Remy LeBeau, but otherwise it was perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Who was the artist on 166 Arco?
Nobody that you'll ever remember. I promise you that. Because I'm sorry. Yeah,
oh,
no,
you're throwing the challenge down now. Okay, it's the
no. I guarantee you, Joe. I think we've spoken about this, but those issues. Not once. I said 166. I apologize. I meant to say 266.
Yes.
Those issues after issue 248 and 250. That's when the X-Men went through the Siege Perilous and died, and they were going up against the Master Mold, and they each were basically went through time and space into different parts of the world, and they became different characters a little bit. Like Peter lost his memory and he became an artist, and he always had the artist in him, but he became a real artist. Psylocke forgot who she was. So a lot of those stories were kind of disjointed, and it showed not only in the story itself. I mean, Gambit showed up saving Storm when she was a little girl because she was turned into a child by Genosians when they were doing the experiments on the mutates. So she was just a little girl, and that he met up with in Africa because they were both stealing things, and that ended up being a Shadow King storyline. So a lot of those stories, until you get into the 270s, didn't really come together until the gold and blue teams of 281.
Okay.
And therefore, the artist for that particular issue, I guarantee you'll never heard of him.
Do you know the name?
No, I don't, but
okay.
I can find out for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just going to, after this, I'm just going to go pull the book and look.
Yeah. So, I sold the book myself, but issue 266, real fast. Hold on a second. I promise you have no idea who this was. Writer, penciler, I guess.
Yeah. Okay,
Mike Collins.
Mike, I know the name.
Come on.
I do know the name.
You're lying.
No, I think he did some work at DC Comics.
Joseph Rubinstein as the inker, Brad Vancata as the colorist, letterers Pat Brousseau and Tom Orzakowski, and Bob Harris as the editor. Mike Collins
might have done Thunderbolt for DC Comics.
That's fine. It's they were just trying. Listen, they cut their teeth on this issue. That's fine. But who cares? Whatever. You had a generational appearance of this character that everybody has loved for such a long time, and Channing Tatum has tried so hard to bring him to the screen. The fact that they were able to in Deadpool Wolverine is amazing.
Yeah, I imagine we'll get at least one more Channing Tatum before.
I think so too.
Before Secret Wars knocks him out of existence. So
let's hope.
Well, yeah. So, all right. Well, listen, audience, you got a little bonus there. Arco, I'm glad. Yeah. Thank you for chatting in for that extra stuff there. We started with the Giants as X-Men, all iconic characters, and ended with Gambit, another iconic character. So there you go. There you go. So
full circle.
Full circle. So, Arco, you will be back this year. We have Wars Part 2 we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
And I have some other stuff I want to maybe hopefully have you a part of.
Cool. Thank you.
Stuff. And then obviously, Joe, we're going to continue on. But listening audience, if you've enjoyed this, if you haven't read Giant Size X-Men, hopefully this year they'll make a reprint copy. I don't know. It's the 50th anniversary, so hopefully at some point this year they'll be.
You get this probably for
your local LCS, if you have access to one, is probably going to do a reprint, so you can get it. Obviously, you can buy the Masterworks that's available. You can buy it's
Epic Editions.
Epic Edition.
I don't know which file.
Or you can. It's on our favorite non-sponsor Hoopla. You can. That's how I read it this time. Was on the Masterworks. I think volume 1 or whatever.
Right.
So please enjoy the origins of these characters that we love, that are now iconic, that we could not think of the X-Men, let alone the Marvel universe, without at this point.
Yeah.
And probably in the next few years, we'll see them readapted again in live action. So we'll see what happens. But I could not have done this episode, of course, without my other two hosts. So thank you so much, Joe.
Oh, you're welcome, James. And Arco, thank you for bringing your vast knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being an outlet for what some may say is useless information, but I'm glad
this is what
that there are people is all about. I appreciate there are people out there that do appreciate this all this information in my head.
I also I love, Arco, that you read it so many times. You didn't have to, like I said, you didn't have to read it for this episode. We're just like, I know it.
Yeah, I got it. I'm good.
Come
on. And listening audience, if you have thoughts about Giant Size X-Men, please. We have a comments page on Facebook. We also have a YouTube. This will go up on the YouTube in some form, so you can put a comment there. And also Spotify. If you were listening to this on your Spotify has a comment section, and you can post there too. So we'd love to hear your thoughts of what you thought of when you first read Giant Size X-Men, or maybe if you're reading it for the first time, what you think of it. So we thank you for listening, and we will talk to you on the next episode.